Okay, let's take a look at the engine, which is the actual vehicle event, and it's called SFX Car Engine. I don't really have anything running on the main timeline linear tab, but there's a lot of stuff going on in two tabs in particular. It's the speed one and the surface one. So the speed one contains all of these samples for the combustion engine, and these are crossfading. And if you choose one, you can see that it's got conditions on it that relate to the wheel category and whether or not the vehicle is reversing or not, because I've got a separate reverse sample. And you can also see, if you click on the event, that there is some pitch automation happening, of course, and some volume automation, as well as a bit of enveloping just to control its onset initially in the first 100 milliseconds. Just a very quick fade, basically, to make sure there's no pops, because a lot of fast switching can happen here as you're driving around. So each of the tracks corresponds to a different wheel category, just to keep things visually organized. And you should be able to more or less see that, okay, this is the next category of wheel, and the wheel category parameter actually simplified a lot. Before I was getting, you can see I'm still getting the individual wheel count parameters through. So if you've got 5 of those wheels, I'll get 5 there. But I think in the end, after a lot of experimentation with that, I was looking at mixing together, different engine sounds based upon mixing together different wheels. But to be honest with you, sonically, it just wasn't cutting the standard that I wanted. It was, too many samples fading in this way. They're very complex sounds, engine sounds, and it just sounds a bit muddy, a bit unclear when you start to blend things and trying to use EQ to kind of manage everything. It just got very involved. So at the moment, I just went with the wheel category to be the main way of controlling what wheel sounds you're hearing, and I found that it simplified the whole process, and the end result meant that everything sounded a bit clearer, because all of these combustion sounds are mixing together with a cab, which you can see on the cab type page. There are different cab categories when you change the main block, or the main, bridge or pilot block of your tech. It can be a basic one, a wide one, minor, hauler, engineer, combat, and then you've got some legacy factions and some some new ones that went in. So all of these will only play when that condition is satisfied, and these sounds are completely synthesized, which was a lot of fun to do. Maybe I should make a separate video about that just because it's fun. But those synthesized sounds are already blending with all of these combustion sounds. And you can also have propellers on your tech at the same time. So things can get quite involved, of course. And the interplay between the combustion and the synthesized sounds forms the function of the engine, but there are a lot of additional sounds that come in based upon how you drive as well, that I was inspired to add after playing a lot of the game Teardown, which I think did a great job on a relatively small budget and sold very well. Things like throttle sounds, and the throttle actually mainly controls the there's a bit of distortion happening and a bit of EQing, I understand, happening with some of the throttling. Um, but yeah, it's just the kind of transmission sounds that you get that I found a lot of fun to put in. So things like turn, when you press the turn buttons, you should hear um, you should hear some transmission sounds. So you'll find them down here, and you've got steer limit sounds that come in. It's kind of that sound where the steering wheel just kind of makes an impact when it's reached its limit, and that will of course change its pitch, as do all the main engine sounds based upon what size vehicle you're driving. So we're using mass. I'm using mass to make sure that all of these sounds sound appropriate for the size of the vehicle that you're building, because of course in TerraTech you can build huge or tiny vehicle, and all the sounds, even the skid sounds here, these sounds, um, you can see that we're on the turn parameter tab, so they'll only engage when turn engages, but they also have conditions such as the wheel force, which is this amazing parameter I got from Tom, that looks at the physics of the wheel suspension. That has to meet that certain minimum, and Things like the throttle and the speed, they're actually inverted conditions. So the throttle has to be above a certain amount, the speed has to be high enough, and the wheel count has to be high enough. And the effectiveness, which is a parameter controlling how good a tech is at moving according to its wheel compared to its weight, its load essentially. We know how effective a tech should be. And that's another parameter that can either rule in or rule out certain sounds. So these skid sounds are basically high performance sounds. When you're going fast and you're turning, you will get a certain results that will have a little bit of pitch modulation and just sound sweet, and it will loop for the duration of the skid. So I really like those ones, and we're touching upon the different parameters that we're using for the engine now, things like effectiveness. So this is another kind of really fun one where when your tech is overburdened according to the types of wheels that you've got on there, that parameter will decrease and you'll start to get three levels of kind of wheel grinding. That starts off medium, goes heavy, and turns into more extreme kind of, your tech is obviously making a noise because it's not effective. And those are really fun to put in. Stuff like that really brings the game to life, and it's great to have input from other people when it comes to shaping these sounds and like, how bad should it be, or how smooth should it be, etc. Yeah, so Surface is another really big event. I'm just going to increase the view of the tracks, because you can see if I scroll down here, there is a huge amount of surface sounds, and these are broken down into the surfaces default. Pebbles and water, didn't really need to use those because there's separate solutions in place. I'll show you that in a moment. The water basically has a bit of spray. When it detects some water spray, it'll add that in. It's actually on the next tab. But yeah, acid, lava, passive, which just means kind of metal or structural blocks that don't actively live on your tech and aren't used in that way. Rock, grass, moss, sand, wet, mud, snow, ice. Each of these surfaces have different samples, and it also is broken down further into 6 different iterations of that sample from Reaper, depending on the wheel. And some of these are actually shared, but a lot of them are just little variants because I'm changing the size of the sound in Reaper, and just offering different categories depending on what wheel you've got and what surface you're driving on. So the general idea is that there's a constant surface sound. That's what you get here. Oh, sorry. Um, yeah, the constant surface sound is here, but that changes. There is a constant wheel sound, is what I meant. And this is the sound of rubber that basically runs all the time. It's very subtle, but this is irrespective, or it's agnostic of surface. So the wheel rubber sound is constant. The surface sound will only play when you're on that surface. And because the world is procedurally generated, some of the surfaces mix together, sometimes in complex ways when you're doing things like turning. And I came to the conclusion that we just need to have our own turn sounds. And I more or less duplicated the stuff here, but down here, and it's just got different envelopes, and obviously it's got different conditions as well, but it's just got a bit of shaping that's different to the standard sounds. That's because turning is just a different action. The wheels move in a different way when you turn. So I wanted to define, kind of customized behavior for when you're turning. And of course you can turn when you're driving. So this just gives a bit more control of how the turn affects the main sound, either when you're stationary by itself or when you're driving with the standard surface sounds. So yeah, there's a lot going on here, and the end result is that you should really feel connected very much to the surface that you're driving on in a way that corresponds to the decisions that you've taken building your vehicle. And things like effectiveness really go a long way to make the player realize that their decisions have consequences, and everything is mirrored in the sound of that engine to really reflect the granularity of the game. And things like wheel force as well. So these are suspension creaks, and these are a lot of fun. they have to be very subtle because obviously you can imagine how that can get annoying. But these suspension sounds, they will come in and they'll come and go depending on, effectively this is boom, this is like the suspension, boom, 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 boom. The wheels will do that. So that value will change quite a lot. And if I click it, you'll see that I am slowing it down with some seek speed adjustment, because in Fmod we want to be able to sometimes independently set the seek speed based on the parameter that's coming from code, because the parameter just might be too sensitive. So this is an example of that. Reverse. Yeah, there's a nice little transmission change sound that happens when you engage reverse, and again when you come out of reverse back to forward. That's trying to mirror that feeling of changing gears, you know, because you'd expect something different to kind of happen when you come in and out of reverse. And it's just nice to mirror that little change. One of our designers was looking at a lot of driving simulators, and that was something that came out of that. So that was a great one to include. Cab type I've touched on already. Brake, very important. You can imagine, obviously you need to be able to hear the sounds of braking, and that needs to be a dynamic sound that changes with your tech. And had these brake burst sounds as well that just give a nice sense of you know, kind of pneumatics going on, as well as the loop, just to make it feel satisfying. Yeah, there's more parameters, stuff to do with the throttle of the boat and the propellers as well, because we have these new blocks coming in. But I think I've more or less covered the main stuff there. It's not too crazy. It's not as crazy as the ambience that I made. And these are some legacy parameters, but I like to keep them there just because there's reasons to use them still going forward. So I like to keep the tabs visible, just for future reference. But yeah, that's more or less it in a nutshell. Let me just see if there's anything else going on. Got some spray for the water. There's a spray parameter that comes through. Let me just fix the view because it's gone a bit crazy. And then I'll just increase the view again. It does that thing. Yeah, a nice bit of spray that kicks up when you're driving along the beach, which is important because driving along the beach should be fun. And when you hit that VFX and you see that spray kicking up, you should hear something nice. And that took a bit of tweaking to get that sounding nice and realistic. We've got a low pass filter. I don't think that's doing anything anymore. I think it was at one stage and I decided to bypass it. And then there's not a whole lot of stuff going on in the master track as well. I've got some automation so that with distance you have some filtering, which is important, I think, because you need to be able to hear how far enemies are away from you, and that needs to respond to your position around them. So that really helps determine, you know, proximity to dangerous enemies. There's quite a long range on it. And yeah, I will essentially duplicate that event and I will give it this name, and I will that's what I would do every time I make significant changes. I'll make sure that those changes are rolled out, and I'll delete that one and I'll rebuild it, and then in Unreal I'll make sure that redirectors are updated so that it's not referencing the metadata of the previous AI event, and then they can be controlled separately through the mixer bus in terms of yeah, certain snapshots, things like scanning for enemies and all that. Sometimes we want to exaggerate the sound of the enemy engines, or we want to muffle the sound because we have yeah, you can see some biomes up here actually, if they're still there. There's certain biomes that do certain things to the engine in terms of there's a bit of filtering happening somewhere. It might be in the mixer bus as well, but there's some filtering happening when you hit certain biomes so that the engine sounds kind of muffled, and that should happen differently depending on whether you're the player or the AI. So it just gives that extra control to basically control these things separately in terms of the way that they're routed through the mixer bus, which is why they're separate events. There's other ways of doing that. That's just the way that I set that particular approach up. But yeah, I'll leave it there because I think I've covered all that main stuff.